June in for our next event. Well, we'll have a few events before then, but hopefully the winds of fortune will smile on us. And at Oaks Park, we're planning to have a big festival, June 25th through 27th of June. And so hopefully we'll see you there. In the meantime, like many organizations, we're trying to find our way through this whole COVID situation, and we decided that we would put on virtual events. So we hope that you like this event. We have another that's coming up in December, and we think you'll like it. It's going to be a gala, a Christmas event on December 12th with the Portland Opera, and it should be wonderful. If any of you would like information about that, you can go to our webpage, www.festaitaliana.org, festaitaliana.org, or if you're lazy like me, just type into Google Festa Italiana Portland and it'll get you there. In any event, we really appreciate your joining us tonight, and we're really looking forward to a good event. One of the reasons why we're doing this event is to share Italian culture with you, our friends, and also because it's an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit better, and also invite you to join us if you like. If any of you are interested in joining up or learning more about our organization, I trust me, we're fun. We're more fun than we have a right to be. If you'd like to, if you're Italian or you like the Italian heritage, we're an Italian organization that's devoted to celebrating all things Italian American. And if you'd like to help out, we definitely have some need. If you go to our webpage, there's a place for you to sign up. We have little jobs and we have big jobs and everything in between. So if you have a little bit of time and a little bit of energy, we'd love to have you. Another thing is that if you have a couple of cents and that you can scratch together, we are a 501c3. So if you'd like to make a donation, you can certainly make a donation, and it's tax deductible. You can also support us by we're having a raffle tonight, and we're having some great auction items. So if you're inclined to do that, the auction and raffle will be open online till midnight tonight. We've got some great auction items. We've got a grappa basket from our new friends at Possessed Winery. We have at Possessed Wine, they put together we have a great basket with lots of wonderful things in it. And we even have a martini basket and a COVID Halloween basket just to get you through. So if you have some time, please go to our website and you can see the wonderful baskets, and we're also having a raffle item. Also, if you're looking for a Christmas gift for that person who might be hard to find a gift for, or maybe they're a foodie, we are selling olive oil. It's olive oil from Italy, made by a small collective over there, and it's wonderful. It even makes my food taste good, and I'm the world's worst cook. In any event, we hope that you will enjoy our program. I just wanted to mention two of our sponsors tonight. Di Nicola's restaurant. Di Nicola's has been I've been eating their pizza since I was a little kid. It's great. And they've been very supportive of us. And we hope that you still have an opportunity. We have some information about how you can order a meal through them tonight, and they have some different delivery modes. So, please take advantage of that tonight. Also, a brand new friend who I'm looking forward to learning more about are the folks at Possessed Wine. And so we're very eager. They've been very supportive also. And as I mentioned, they put together a great basket. So I'm definitely looking forward to learning more about them. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for lending us your ears. I'm going to turn it over to our Master of Ceremonies, your host tonight, Andrea Scasso. If his voice sounds familiar, it's probably because you might have heard him on the Italian Hour on Sundays, and I definitely encourage you to tune into that because he's great. So Thank you, everyone. And please remember our raffle and our auction if you can. And let me turn it over to Andrea. And Andrea, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Ed. And by the way, I put the link to the Festa Italiana in the chat. So either you can search online, any search engine, Festa Italiana Portland will find us, or just look at the chat. So hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Scasso. I am from Trieste. And since this was about Italian immigration to the Northwest, if you want to put in the chat where you or your family was from, that would be great, just to get an idea, or just to know you and your background. And so, yeah, Joe shortly will be talking about the Italian immigration to the Northwest. But before, like Ed mentioned, we have some great partners. And I'm going to start chatting a little bit with Donata from De Nicola. Buonasera. Ciao, Donata.
Buonasera.
Buonasera. So, yeah, actually, this is perfect. We're talking about Italian immigration and the history of Italians in the Northwest, because you tell us, you run a restaurant that has been in the North, probably, was it one of the first ones here in the area? And if you can tell us the name and a little bit the background.
Sure. We opened up Giovanni's in Beaverton in 1975. That would have been our first restaurant. And then 3 years later, we sold that to our partners and went out on our own and opened up De Nicola's on 35th and Powell. And my parents were born and raised in Italy, and they didn't come over until their 20s, early 20s, through Ellis Island, like most people, and then just got into any kind of work they could find, and some dangerous work too. My dad worked in the mines in New York. He became a construction worker, and then, you know, learned how to help with building dams, and that brought him to the Northwest. That's what brought him to the Northwest. And it wasn't until, you know, the 70s that my parents started thinking about possibly opening an Italian restaurant. And there weren't many here, but you sure had Monte Carlos, you had Lido's, you had Carol Mico's, you had some Italian restaurants, but my mom could cook like no other.
That's truly a history of Italian restaurants here in Portland.
Yeah.
Well, we're a little bit short on time, so I don't cut you off, because we could do the entire hour just talking about your experience here with the restaurant. But what can you just tell us about the promotion that you're doing right now with Festa?
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. We would love to offer anybody that just mentions the name Festa Italiana a 15% discount on any carry out or dine in. Can't do it on delivery, unfortunately, because that's a whole different ball game. But either if you want to call in at 503-239-5221 and order to go, or if you want to come in, dine in, we do have 50% seating, which is 14 tables. So there's always a table available, but it's very safe and everything's socially distanced. So yeah, we would love to see anybody, and just mention the Festa and get a discount.
Great. Thank you very much, Donata.
Absolutely.
It sounds like we need to do a program just with you. And also, I'm going to switch now to the other great partner, Carmina, or is that how you pronounce it? Carmina? Possessed Wine. You have a great label, but you are on mute. So let me see if I can unmute you. No, you have to unmute yourself. So,
okay, there he is.
There you go. The guy in the Roman costume. Hi, Carmina.
Hello, yeah, we're having a costume party, and this was actually fortuitous that I had a Roman costume on today.
Very appropriate. So yeah, you are giving some bottles and helping out the Festa, and you want to tell us a little bit about your wine, the wines that you have, and also about your other business, about the wine tours.
Oh, sure. You know, my wines are fantastic. I've been somebody's monkey for 30 years, and so I'm just about to release my label. It's biodynamic. I'm the first biodynamic vigneronist and the first biodynamic cellarist or winemaker in North America. My family from Sicily, we work in cooperative wine and olive oil. We have for many hundreds of years. And so I just continued the tradition here in the United States, particularly with Oregon and the cool climate grapes. Fantastic, unbelievable. I've been here again 30 years just because I was so blown away by how amazing the cool climate grapes we have in Oregon are. And,
okay, great. So we'll all have to try it. And how do we get your wine? Can you buy your wine?
I don't have a point of sale yet. I do have a website.
Online. You have a website, right?
Yeah, possessedwine.com. And so you can contact me there. I'll get it to you somehow, particularly if it's around Portland, I'll get it to you. I run the other piece is Oregon wine business of Oregon Winemaker Tours. And we do only private tours. I got a filter in the vehicle, whatever. It's kind of weird during COVID to take people around, but it's what I do still right now, and it's working okay. And I take you to top wineries around, and we just talk about things. Again, I'm a winemaker 30 years, so I know the guy's dog died. So if you want to learn some funny things or serious things, it's kind of fun.
Okay, and if people want to get to you, you can go to the Festa Italiana website, and there is a link to the Possessed Wines wines. So thank you very much. Grazie, grazie. Sorry for cutting you all short, but we need to get going. And so we have Joe Cavalli. Ciao, buonasera.
Buonasera.
And so I thought we're already at 7:12. So instead of doing your history, just say that you're a professor of history at Clark College.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah,
this is my 28th all year. Around the world history. In fact, you even taught not too far away from my hometown, in just over the border in Zagabria in Croatia. And so you also know that part of my world.
My favorite city in Italy is Trieste. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's nice. But I'll just let you get started, and just the format, if at all possible, put the questions, if you have any questions, in the chat, and I'll try to collect them. I'm not going to force to mute everybody. So if you really have something that you think is a super important question for that moment, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, but otherwise, please stay muted. And if you think the question can be answered at the end, please put it in the chat. So thank you, grazie a tutti, and let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I'd like to remind everybody today is the last day of Italian American Culture Month in the United States. I don't know if you knew that, but the month of October. So put that on your calendar for the next 4 hours. Me personally, I've been doing this for 28 years. I teach right now. I'm professor of history at Clark College, and I taught overseas for 10 years in Rome, Florence, Zagreb, and also in the Middle East. So I've had a lot of experience internationally, and I think Italian immigration to the Pacific Northwest is a really understudied subject in the field of immigration history. So this talk really should be about 4 or 5 talks. I've narrowed it down to 30 minutes, and I'm sure I'm going to leave a lot of people out of this. My apologies, Italian-American Portlanders, but for 30 minutes, there's a lot of information. So maybe we could do a follow-up or a couple follow-up presentations after this. Who knows? So my presentation is Italian migration to the Pacific Northwest, and it starts in the 16th century. The 16th century is because of the beginning of the Columbian Exchange. Now, if you look at the map here, I'm still getting used to talking into my computer and not seeing people, and so bear with me. This is a map of the Italian peninsula on the eve of the era of discovery and the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange means the free flow of goods, ideas, and peoples, for better, for worse, starting with Columbus. It's an unbroken chain of history that continues to this day. So part of the Italian immigration to the Pacific Northwest is a definite part of this Columbian Exchange. But if you look at the Italian peninsula, one thing you won't see is Italy. Italy didn't exist at this time. It was a compilation of feudal states, the papal states controlled by the papacy, all the way up until the Lateran Treaty after Italy's unified. Spain owned parts of the Italian peninsula, so did the Kingdom of Austria, as well as the French. You had bishoprics where bishops were in charge in Trento, and you had just about everybody. Italy becomes leverage for the major powers of Europe to gain hegemony. And from this will come the country of the nation state of Italy, which is really, I think, interesting in the sense that it comes out of an era of revolution. Let's see if I can move this. Here we go. There's Italy, and it will move forward to 1859 versus the Republic today. These are the regions, or the forming regions of Italy. In 1859, this is before there's an Italian state. And as you can see, it's been narrowed down to a few different kingdoms. You still have the Papal States and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies in the south, controlled really by the Spanish. If you look to the right, you see the Republic. This is it. These are the regions of Italy right here. And what I'm going to focus on for the most part is immigration to the Pacific Northwest. But where did these immigrants come from? Where did they emigrate from in Italy? And it's really surprising because we all have a kind of a stereotype of what the Italian immigrant is or was. And it's you get these pictures of Ellis Island, of a family, of someone with everything they have wrapped up in a suitcase or the clothes on their back, which is, there's truth to that, but it wasn't entirely true. There's all kinds of different immigrants from Italy at different times for different reasons. So we're going to look at that. This, for purposes, is the destination, the Pacific Northwest. This is in 1846, when it was really the Wild West, and it was the Oregon Territory, which included British Columbia. I didn't include British Columbia in the talk tonight, although, believe it or not, out of the Pacific Northwest, probably more Italians reside in British Columbia than they do in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho.
See if yours came.
If you look here, this is the line, treaty line in 1848, or let me look, 46, excuse me. This was the area that we're in right now, Portland, Vancouver area. It was ruled conjointly by the British and the Americans. And eventually Fort Vancouver, which was the outpost, Hudson's Bay Company, will go over to the Americans. From there, this will be the capital of the Pacific Northwest, and then Portland obviously will replace that. This is about 10 years before the beginning of Italian immigration into the Northwest. Although we don't know, because there were ships from Spain, France, Great Britain that were going up and down the west coast of what is the United States and Canada today, and there probably were sailors from the Italian Peninsula, but we have no real record of that. This is what it looks like today with a highway system. And I have a few maps coming up as far as destinations for immigrants. Now, throughout the histories, primarily immigration is a push-pull. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not spontaneous. There's something pushing immigrants out and something pulling immigrants in. In the United States, many different pulls in, mostly the endemic labor shortage that's pretty consistent with American history all the way up until probably recently, although I do say there still is a labor shortage, but different types of labor. Also, it becomes a pathway, not just for immigrants, but also for new ideas, for food, an exchange of everything. It's part of this Columbian exchange that I mentioned earlier. So you have economic migration, moving to find work, follow a career path, social migration, somewhere for better quality of life. As you know, Italy in the beginning of the 20th century was way overpopulated. The South, particularly tenant farmers, food was extremely expensive. It was not much hope. It was very bleak during that period of time. There's also political migration, or emigres as they're called. And this is to escape political persecution. We have all kinds of different revolutions going on in Europe in the mid 1800s. The 48ers, as they're called in Germany, where you have the advent of liberalism, not what the Americans call liberal, but liberalism is in democracies. You have anarchists, you have socialists, and then later you have communists. And as a result of this conflict, that drives immigration into the United States. And also the United States is going to react to that by crafting its immigration laws to exclude political radicals in the early 20th century, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Environmental causes of migration include natural disasters. There's floods, or earthquakes, volcanoes, Mount Vesuvius, and drought. And there's also the singular event, the one-off event, such as the gold rush in California brings a plethora of different groups from around the world, not just from Europe, but from South America, from Asia, all seeking fortunes. In fact, Levi Strauss, probably one of the most famous of those immigrants that comes from Switzerland, doesn't make his mark in the gold fields of Nevada, California. He does it by taking tent covers made from denim and stapling them with rivets into pants, creating the Levi Strauss jeans, and becomes probably the most wealthiest immigrant from the gold rush. There's also the Klondike rush in Alaska in 1896, which draws in Italians to Seattle, which is the gateway to Alaska. And some of them stay. So there's that. And then finally, there's forced immigration, which for the history of the United States is chattel slavery, which is slavery based exclusively on race. There's indentured servitude, which is by where one sells himself or herself into slavery for a period of time, usually 7 years. But that was not an option for Italians, at least during colonial America. All right, move this along. Push factors, this is just to reinforce what I've just said: war, persecution, political stability, safer, less crime, good climate. All of those are push-pull. Now, what was going on in Italy at the time before the floodgates open up to Italian immigration, especially the Pacific Northwest, is unification. As you remember from your high school history, after the Napoleonic Wars, there's a Congress of Vienna, and the European powers get together and they decide, how is Europe going to be organized? Mostly to keep the French from dominating again. But you have this Italian question: what's going to happen? And in the 1840s, post-Congress of Vienna, you have this stop and start to unify the Italian peninsula. The people that live in the Italian peninsula, they all speak primarily the same language, or closely to one another in different dialects. The same religion unifies them. They're all Catholics, most of them. And also the shared culture of them being dominated by other powers, the French or the Austrians or whoever. So there's a push for nationalism. And out of this will come the Italian state, as well as the unification of Germany and the unification, well, the Franco-Prussian War, the unification of Germany, excuse me, in 1870 is definitely a aids in the unification or the risorgimento of Italy. Troops were pulled out of Rome to go to French troops to fight in France. And from there, Garibaldi will take his cannons into Rome, point them at the Pope, and force a deal. Although the Vatican won't recognize the state of Italy until 1928. So just a quick brief timeline right here. Garibaldi, by the way, Garibaldi was briefly an Italian immigrant to the United States. He comes to New York and works in a candle factory in Long Island for a while. That's his second exile. His first exile is into South America in Uruguay, where he fights in the revolutions there that are happening in the 1840s. The 1840s is a very turbulent time around the planet. He comes back kind of a hero, and he goes back to the United States. Abraham Lincoln in 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, when General Lee throws in his lot with the state of Virginia, Lincoln asks Garibaldi to command the Union forces. But Garibaldi wants, and this is at that time was a 3-star position, Garibaldi wants 4 stars, not 3. And also the King of Italy is very much against his unifier fighting for the Americans and Garibaldi. General McClellan eventually will get the job, who, by the way, was out at Fort Vancouver at the time. He was one of the chief engineering, engineered most of the roads over Mount Hood into the Willamette Valley and also into Fort Vancouver. That's a whole different talk. 1871, the Risorgimento is finished. Rome's proclaimed the capital of a unified Italy. And this is just briefly what you didn't see on the chart. You have all these stops and starts. You also have, in addition to the 48, the revolutions being fought in Germany and Italy, you have the Irish potato famine, which accelerates Irish immigration into the United States as well. The United States changes radically between 1840 and really 1925, when limits are placed on immigration. And we'll see how that happens. The Ottoman Empire is receding, and Slavic nationalism fills the vacuum. And this will also cause Italian immigration out of the Irredente, what they call the lands that the Italians controlled, or at least the Venetians, Trieste being one of them. And this will cause immigrants to flee the Dalmatian coast, and some of them will end up in the state of Washington, as we'll see. I don't want to give it away. This is what Europe looks like in 1860. Now you have Italy, the Papal States, the Austrian Empire, the French Empire, all these empires. World War I will sort them out. And then you have Dalmatia, which is right here, if you look at the magic arrow. And this is mostly Italian speaking. And they've been in that part of Europe really since the Romans. And with the Slavic advancement and World War I, Italy will not get what it wants out of the Treaty of Versailles. And this will cause, well, it leads to World War II, as we'll see. And there will be a lot of, after World War II, a number of Italian immigrants will leave what was then Dalmatia or Trieste, Istria, and end up in the United States under the refugees from communist countries, Tito. And I can think of one Italian family, the Cetina family, Sergio Cetina, I believe chromed bumpers in Portland in the 60s, was a refugee from Trieste, from World War II, his family. And also one of the more famous, Mario Andretti, was also from Istria, that fled because of Tito and the communists. Now, this is an Italian passport, 1909. It's Kingdom of Italy at that time, before it was a republic. And we get down to the immigration part of this. If you look at the two maps, you have one, I split time up, 1876 to 1900, and then from 1900 to 1915, this is the bulk of Italian immigration into the United States. Almost all of, well, 2/3 of the immigration of Italians into the United States or out of Italy, really, from 1876 to 1900 comes from the northern part of the Italian peninsula of northern Italy. And these are the regions, mostly the Veneto, Lombardia, Piemonte, Toscana. And after the unification of Italy and the Italian kingdom, from 1900, immigration shifts almost exclusively to the south, at least to the United States. And Campania is one, and Sicily are the two big regions that provide millions of immigrants to the United States. So to the north for the first part, and to the south, second part. Where else did these immigrants go besides the United States? Obviously, not all of them came to the United States. The first wave of immigrants from 1876 to 1900 ended up in South America, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, also Canada, Australia, and South Africa. Also into other European countries, Belgium and the coal mines definitely, and other industrialized countries, Switzerland. Italian immigrants built the Swiss railway system in the late 19th century. Am I going too fast, or is this?
No, I think it's about right.
Okay, now the Italian push and pull, this is it. The Risorgimento, definitely a push. Overpopulation. Italy by 1900 did not go through the Industrial Revolution. Italy is only drug into the industrial world post-World War I. It has one of the highest illiteracy rates in Europe, 70% plus. Only, I think Spain was 85% illiteracy rate. The high cost of food, the average Italian family spent about 75% of their income on food, very expensive. And in the Italian government, in the kingdom, you had a parliamentary democracy, or excuse me, constitutional monarchy. And that was a gridlock style government where nothing got done. Nothing until, well, the fascists will come in and end that. The pull into the United States, to the right there, is endemic labor. Italians are considered Caucasian, although there was a question about Southern Italians and Sicilians. Briefly, there was in the Census Bureau, there was a couple of questions that listed from Italy, specifically an addendum to the Italian immigration form. Did you come from the South, specifically Southern Italy, Sicily? However, they were deemed Caucasian, so they were allowed to work on land. A couple of years after this, Mexican immigrants were considered Caucasian, so they weren't segregated. It was not a very welcoming experience for immigrants into the United States probably into today. A lot of immigrants were Italian immigrants. They were birds of passage, what meant temporary. They were coming in to earn enough money to leave. So they go back to Italy and retire. Nativists were dead set against immigrants, particularly Catholic immigrants, from coming into the United States to upset the balance of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant who controlled all the branches of government and really controlled political life in the United States. That's why when I hear today that the 7 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court are Catholics, I think that would have never happened 50 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. Down here, a piece of little culture, immigrant culture. This was known as the Italian banjo, and it's a shovel. And that was assigned to particularly those Italian immigrants that dug the New York City subways and also in the mines. This is an overall chart. I mean, it's just numbers, data, numbers. I'll try to explain this briefly as possible. Starting in 1820, this is the Italian immigration, according to the Census Department, that come into the United States. It peaks roughly, 1914 on the eve of World War I. Briefly goes back up in 1921 when World War I is over, the Treaty of Versailles. And then it consistently stays and it starts to drop off towards World War II. And it drops off. I believe the last number I got from the Census Bureau is about 2,000 in 1980 for a variety of reasons. So the peak years are definitely the beginning of the 20th century. I thought I put these slides in. These are Italian records. I thought I put them in there because I think they're interesting. 1904, these are Italians that were arrested for homicide. This is a pie of all the different immigrants that were arrested for homicide in the United States. And out of that pie of immigrants, the Italians formed most of them. Germans 33, the Russians were 10, Poles 13. Also incarceration rates of all the immigrants in 1920. If you went into the jail system and you looked at the roster of the jails or the prisons, 60% of them, and these are not just prisons in the East Coast, these are all over. 60% of them or excuse me, 40% of them were Italian. So definitely some bumps in the road to the American dream. This is the backlash against Italian immigration into the United States, which affects immigration into the Pacific Northwest. 1917, you have the Literacy Act, which was called the Idiot Act, which meant that if you couldn't read or write, you were denied entry into the United States. And this was directed specifically at Italian immigration. Also, at this time, at the end of World War I, you have unbelievable turmoil in Europe, starvation. In comes the Quota Act in 21. Eventually, that will be passed and enforced in 1925. And this is the system of immigration the United States will adopt until 1965. And it bases immigration into the United States solely on nationality, but really tailored to religion. And the Italians who dominate immigration in 1921, when the Immigration Act is passed, their quota is the smallest of all the European countries, and the countries of Great Britain and Scotland, their immigration quota is expanded. So it's a way to tinker with who comes into the country. Mussolini gets involved, and I'll cover him a little bit later. But there was the first row that Mussolini has internationally is with the Americans over Italian immigration. And with the Literacy Act, Mussolini is upset because he can't get rid of his undesirables or those that are opposed to his regime. And I put a couple of quotes on here, but I don't want to slow everybody down. Eventually, what's going to happen is immigration will be cut off because of those Italians going back to Italy in the 1920s to visit are subject to the Italian draft by the fascists. And the terms of service weren't 2 years, they were 7 years that one was drafted into the Italian army. So it was, once you came over, the birds of passage, at least in the later 1920s, stopped, couldn't go back. Although the Italians in the United States sent money back, obviously, to their relatives in Italy, and it kept the Italian economy afloat under the fascists throughout the 1920s. There's, in brief right here, the closing of the Golden Door, it's closed. This is the door of immigration. The Lunatic Law, the Anarchist Exclusion Act, no political agitators. These were for the anarchists, Sacco and Vanzetti. Later on, communists directed towards Germans, specifically union leaders and such. The Emergency Quota Act established national immigration quotas of 21. And then you have the Immigration Act of 24, which goes into effect in 25. And this specifically targets the reduction of Italian immigration. And Italian immigration into the Pacific Northwest drops off to nearly nothing after 1925. So that's definitely cuts the pole in two. These are immigration numbers from Italy from 1876 to 1900 by region. As you can see, the Veneto led the way, mostly northern regions, Piemonte, Lombardia, Veneto. And then you have Venezia Giulia right there at 847,000, Toscana, Campania, and then all the way down to Sardinia at the bottom. Does anybody know which region is missing? It caught my eye. I've looked at it like 1,000 times, and I finally figured it out. There's one region missing.
Yeah, Venezia Giulia should be Friuli Venezia Giulia because
that's later on.
Oh, it's separate.
This is 1876. There's one region in the Northwest, Valdosta.
Aosta, yeah, the Aosta.
Oh, Valdosta
is missing. It's all right. It's 1901 to 1915, the height of Italian immigration. If you look down here, Sicily, at the bottom, followed by Campania, and then you have Piemonte and Lombardia following, and Veneto following behind them. So these are out of Italy. 1946 to 42, really during the war, at the end of where the war starts. Again, Sicily, and then you have Piemonte and Lombardia. And these were primarily to other European countries and also Canada, Australia, South Africa. 46 to 61, the main points of, or the destination for Italian immigrants from 46 to 61 was Australia. Australia, Canada. Toronto, believe it or not, of all the cities in North America of primary Italian language speakers, Toronto is the first one, more so than New York or Chicago or St. Louis. It's Toronto. I think it's about 400,000 native Italian speakers in Toronto, Canada today. This is a pie of the 100 years, 1876 to 1976, of those regions where immigrants derived from. Veneto, 3.3 million. Friuli, there you go, Lombardia, Campania, and Sicilia right there. So you could say, you can extrapolate from these charts and facts and figures and data. Everybody was getting out of Italy during this period of time. And this is what it looks like, the destination in North America. If you notice the purple, destination East Coast, Pennsylvania, New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and then slowly across California. Well, Florida, but Florida's second immigration from the East Coast down. And then you have the Midwest, Chicago, St. Louis, and then down here, really, which is the first point of entry for massive Italian immigration, which is New Orleans. After the Civil War, there's a very acute endemic labor shortage in the South, and Sicilians come into New Orleans and take up the jobs of which were once done by slaves, especially stevedores on the docks. If you looked at a comparison of those groups coming in, if you look at Oregon out here, 1900, most of the immigrants coming into the United States, 1900, by a percentage of nationality, are Germans and the Irish. You get Sweden and Minnesota. But if you look at Oregon, Oregon's Germany, even California. And then obviously 1950, the Bracero program, and after World War II. Mexico will dominate the southern tier, and you still have Italy, a little bit on the East Coast, but primarily from other places. Now, get to the Pacific Northwest. My apologies if it's taken me this long to get here. These are the major, now there are Italian immigrants living all over the Pacific Northwest, but these are at least the measurable concentrations of Italian immigrants in the Pacific Northwest. Primarily Seattle, Portland, Spokane, Walla Walla. And then you have Chiloquin, which also includes Weed and Shasta, California, a little bit in Boise, but mostly in Idaho. It's Pocatello and Idaho Falls because of the railroad. And then Lewiston, and then Coeur d'Alene for mining, Spokane because of the railway, the Union Pacific, Burlington Northern. So these are where communities form. 1846. Now, Portland, this is an area map or a surveyor's map in 1852, before it was a state. And just to give you, I like to look at maps because my mind wanders. And if you look out here, see where Rocky Butte is? Let me move this. Right out here, Park Rose. This will be one of the 3 of the major, you call it a neighborhood, I guess, places where Italians will concentrate. Rocky Butte, where the airport is, or excuse me, Rocky Butte Park Rose, where the airport is. Southwest Portland, and then the east side, which will be southeast Portland, the different neighborhoods there. We'll get more into that. So Portland, we'll start with Portland because we live in Portland. 1900, there are less than 1,000 Italians that lived permanently. Like I said, the one thing that the difference between America and Europe, especially at this time, the average American starting in the late 20th century, or excuse me, 19th century into the 20th century, the average American moved in his or her lifetime 10 times, 10 times. Italy, you stayed in the same village for generations. So Portland, the United States is fluid all the time, but the census counts 1,000 Italians living permanently in the city of Portland in 1900. 1910, it booms to about 5,000 plus. The typical profile for an Italian immigrant to Portland before 1914 was male, a bird of passage, most likely from the north, Liguria or Piemonte, who saved enough money, or who was planning on saving enough money to return to Italy. They were called birds of passage in America, and I know this in Italy too. They were called the Americani. In the small village where the Cavallis come from, there was a guy that lived in the village across the Brenta River in Costa San Marino, who worked in Pittsburgh for 30 years as a mechanic, and then came back and retired there. So even up until the 1960s, you had Italians, immigrants, earning enough to get over there to retire. In Portland, there was a greater diversity by region, different regions in Italy, than the industrial Midwest or the East Coast, where you tended to have exclusive tenements that were Sicilians or Neapolitans or Bari from wherever. They mixed a lot more in Portland, and that's true with all the immigrant groups in Portland. Portland's a very different place, and I can't come up with a word to describe it. More of a bubble, kind of. After 1914, before the closing of the Golden Door in 1925, up to World War II, immigrants to Portland brought their families or started sending for their families in the 1920s, second decade, post-World War I, started sending for their families to come to Portland. Before 1900, the Italian population of Portland, the largest city in Oregon, was negligible. Really, it wasn't even a blip on. It's hard to find maps or census data that even mentions Italian immigration to Portland. Mostly, the Italians were residing in Southwest Portland, and this would be the Hillsdale, Multnomah neighborhoods, and on the east side, southwest front to Brooklyn neighborhoods, a little bit into Milwaukee. This includes where Reed College is, Eastmoreland, Westmoreland, and the very large farming community out in Park Rose, which is, we used to call it East County before it was incorporated. I put this up here because I thought it was interesting. It really doesn't have much to do with what I'm talking about right now, but I thought I'd mention it. In addition to the iconic Italian churches in Portland, which I'll get to, St. Philip's, the Grotto, St. Rita, you can count that, and also St. Michael's. You had a Baptist mission, Italian Baptist mission in the heart of Southeast Portland that operated only for a couple of years. And this was the Italian Baptist mission. It was located on Southeast 17th and Tibbetts. And this was the Baptist minister that was recruiting souls, or Baptists, Francesco Sanella. And what happened to him? That's a whole paper waiting to be written. Who knows? This is the first documented Italian immigrant to Portland, and I got this from the article. Everyone did their homework, I hope, of reading the articles posted on the Fest page. Thank you, Andrea. This was Samuele Arrigoni. He was from Milan, then part of the Kingdom of Lombardia, Venezia, and he was a merchant marine officer. And it's interesting history because he comes to Portland not the traditional way, which most Italian immigrants come to Portland by the train, later by plane. He comes through the second Oregon Trail. Most, it's not really hyped in schools, I don't think so. And when I say second Oregon Trail, people look at me like I'm crazy. But the second Oregon Trail is the route that takes you from New York City to Panama. You disembarked in Panama, you hiked over the isthmus, and then you got on another boat, and you took it to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to the Columbia Bar, and then up the Columbia to Portland. And that's the way that Arrigoni came. And he was the first really documented person, Italian immigrant of note, that at least gets ink in the old papers of Portland and in the census data. He purchased the Frontier Hotel, which was the largest hotel in Portland and Oregon at the time, at 300 rooms. And he was a successful hoteler for 12 years before retiring to Astoria and becoming a pillar of the Astorian Society there. So he's the first. This is courtesy of the Oregon Historical Society. These are crudely marked out maps done by me using the technology at hand. If you're looking to your left here, the southwest neighborhoods, look at the magic arrow. You can see there's the Willamette River to get a reference point. There's Ross Island. There's the Brooklyn neighborhood over here. This is across the river Catamicos all the way. There's the Markham Bridge. This is the first large Italian community. They shared it with mostly Russian Jews and Jews from Eastern Germany in this area here. Most of it's been torn down because of urban renewal in the 50s and 60s. Some houses still exist from and on to 4th. This is where St. Michael's is. And then they get bumped across the river to Southeast Portland. In Southeast Portland along the Willamette, you have Front Street, which is where all the produce merchants gathered. And then from there, all the way down the river into Milwaukee and up into, really up to, you could say, Mount Tabor. At that point in time, in the early 20th century, the first decade, the Italians shared, a lot of truck farmers, believe it or not, orchards on Mount Tabor, they shared with the Japanese. They're Japanese immigrants that came in, and they farmed the eastern side of, or the backside of Mount Tabor, where you had Italians on the west side of Mount Tabor. We're Assumption parishes. In fact, there's a couple of interesting articles in the Oregonian, I believe it was, one of the early Portland papers about having problems with bears on Mount Tabor eating the fruit. I think bears are the least of worries of Portland today, but I thought you'd find that interesting. Anyway, that's where they settle in Portland. This is an early 1930s view from a plane. It's not a drone picture of Park Rose, Sandy Boulevard, Park Rose right here. Eventually the airport will go in right here. And then you have Rocky Butte, and off in the distance over here, Mount Tabor. A lot of farmland. There was a lot of stands of old growth forest as well. I included a neighborhood profile. And if anybody wants this PowerPoint, let me know and I'll send it to you. And this was from the Rossi family, one of the pioneering families into Park Rose, who bought their property from a homesteader, a Poland family. They hailed from Genoa. They originally settled in Ladd's Addition in Southeast and then made their way out for cheaper land in Park Rose. About 150 acres. This is in before 19, this is about 1900 for $9,000. And then they had to clear the trees out and they blew the stumps out with blasting caps and such. And this became very productive farmland in Portland. Still is. There's Aldo Rossi right there to the left with mechanical machinery in Park Rose. This is the old port. This is what will become the Portland Airport. It's the old Portland Airfield. The original airport was on Swan Island. And this will later become part of Fazio Farms. Ana Nasib, if you're out there listening, correct me if I'm incorrect. And then to the right, you have, let me move this down here. This is West Portland or South Portland, what we call Southwest Portland today, an aerial footage, which is all gone, knocked down, urban renewal. This is, I found this interesting because I play a lot of golf. And this is, if you play golf, you go to Eastmoreland. Next time you walk between the 17th and the 18th holes, you'll cross over the 17th, you know, that par 3, you have to go over the little part of Crystal Lake there where the green is. Then you, as you're going to the green, you walk over the bridge. That's this bridge right here. There's a waterfall right there. If you look, if you see the magic arrow down here, you'll see it. It's harder than hell to see. There's a turbine right here. And this was the original site of the Ravelli House right here, which sits next to it now on the corner of Southeast 28th. There's a little produce stand there and a half acre that they farm right across from where Reed College is. It was originally here, and they used that turbine connected to a generator to use the water power to generate electricity. This is in the early 1900s. I find that pretty interesting. This is the house here. If you look to the far right, you see the original house here. And it was picked up between, I talked to Giovannina Ravelli, who was married to Pianovi. They picked up the house and moved it. They rolled it across logs with a team of horses. And they already had the foundation or the cellar dug out. And they just set it on top of the cellar. And it's still there today. In fact, this Josefina still lives there today. And she's 92 years old. So they were from Liguria, again, and they settled there. This is the iconic Ladd's Addition. If you look at it, it's shaped like a British flag, or Union Jack, excuse me. And this was, William Ladd was one of the old, really corrupt mayors of Portland in the that's a whole different class, in the 1850s. And he farmed it and then developed it and laid it out in the form of Union Jack. And what he did was he copied the plan. If you look at the plans for the development of Washington, when Washington, D.C. was first, they drained the swamps and they developed and they started building roads and such. It looks exactly like this, where you have the roundabout and you have different quadrants right here, really in the shape of a Union Jack. And this is where the Italians lived to the south of that and to the west. And then as they accumulated a little more capital and moved up the socioeconomic ladder, started moving into Ladd's Addition, which is a very desirable neighborhood today, very expensive. Moving a little bit further north into Washington, this is Seattle. And Seattle is very difficult to get numbers. You know, I corresponded with the Italian consulate in Seattle, and they only have numbers really that go back just recently. So we know by 1880, there were about 1,000 plus Italians immigrate to Seattle. How many were there when that happened? We don't know. By 1910, the number, just like in Portland, it kind of mirrors it, increases to 3,400 Italians. By 1915, the families start to come over. It's estimated that we're 200 to 300 farming families in and around Seattle. In fact, just like the Portland Airport, the Fazio Farms was, the DeSimone family owned most of the land where the SeaTac Airport is, and sold it to Boeing for $1, if you can believe that. Well, actually, it was a smart investment, and I'll tell you why. Seattle's immigration population mirrored Portland's demographically, but the state of Washington had thousands more Italians because a lot of them settled in Spokane in the east and Walla Walla. Unknown are the number of Italian immigrants who passed through Seattle on their way to Vancouver, also because of the gold rush. One of the more famous Italian immigrants to live in Seattle was a saint, the first Italian-American saint, and she hails from, in fact, I accidentally stumbled into her church in Nettuno, south of Rome, the famous, where the Battle of Anzio. And she settles in Seattle and founds a couple of schools and a hospital before moving on to Chicago. And that's Mother Frances Cabrini. Ultimate assimilation. The ultimate, I think, this is my own personal opinion, so don't write this down. Ultimate assimilation is being elected to office by the population. That means you have made it. This was Albert Rossellini. He was elected governor of Washington in 1956. He was the first Italian-American governor west of the Mississippi. He's the son of saloon owners, immigrated from Italy. And he was a reformer, Republican, but back when Republicans weren't like the Republicans today. He creates the University of Washington Medical School, dental school. He built the second floating bridge across Lake Washington. And he was also the victim, or the what do you call it, whipping boy of really whipped up prejudice against Catholics and particularly Italians. He goes on television 4 years, if you remember, John F. Kennedy in his run for office in 1960 went down to the Baptist conference in Texas and went to the Pentecostals in Alabama and other places and gave his contrition, kind of a contrition speech, saying that he wouldn't serve the Pope and he would serve the people of the country, and he was an American first, basically promising to be an American over a Catholic. Rossellini had to do the same thing in the state of Washington. He gets elected in 56, and there was still a lot of nativism in Washington, Oregon as well. And he goes on television and to assuage the fears of Washington's, WASP population, that if elected, he would serve the residents of Washington and not the Pope. So it wasn't JFK that did that first. Rossellini does it. When he comes out of retirement in 72, runs again, there was an anti-Rossellini bumper sticker that was very popular in Washington, and it simply said, "We need a governor, not a godfather," in reference to the movie The Godfather. So take it for what that's worth. This is the guy I wanted to get to, Andrea. Here's an Italian immigrant from the Irredente, Henry Suzalo, or as he's pronounced or spelled in Bosnia, Montenegro, and Dalmatia, Zusalo. Zusalo. C in Serbo-Croatian is pronounced like a TS. So it's, and you pronounce, there's no double consonants. Yeah, Zusalo. He was born in San Diego to Venetian immigrant parents from the Austrian Empire of Ragusa, which is today Dubrovnik, part of the Irredente. Dr. Suzalo was highly educated. He earned degrees from San Jose State, Stanford, and a PhD from Columbia. He was the first president of the University of Washington from 1915 to 1926, and was the first academic in his writings to predict the rise of fascism in Europe post-World War I. He warned the United States was really they acquiesced to Mussolini because he was an anti-communist. Suzalo advocated for workers' rights, an 8-hour workday. Can you believe that? That's radical, which made him a target of Washington's timber barons. In 1920, as you know, in the Pacific Northwest, the wealthiest citizens were in the lumber business. 26, Suzzallo was forced to take leave of absence and never returned to the university. The story is that the timber barons bought out all of the board of trustees and had Suzzallo forced to retire. It's a very common name. If you go to Dubrovnik, you'll see it. You'll see that name. In comes Giuseppe Di Simone, probably one of the most larger than life Italian immigrants in the Pacific Northwest, both figuratively and literally. He was like 6'2", 300 pounds. He was an 18-year-old stowaway on a ship from Naples to Ellis Island. He stopped briefly in Rhode Island, works on a hog farm. I don't know why he did that. That would have been horrible. And then comes out to Seattle. And he settles in the South Park neighborhood, which is the equivalency of the east side of Portland. This is interesting. I did not know this, but up until 1910, you couldn't sell your produce in Seattle directly to the population, to the public. You had to sell it to agents, middlemen who sold it. Eventually they get around that, and the Pike Street market, later public because of this, was controlled by the Japanese and Italian farmers. They got together and they sold shares in the public market. 1941, Di Simone buys out all of them and becomes fabulously wealthy. Because Boeing, Seattle is, because of the peninsula, kind of like San Francisco, it can't really expand like Portland. So Boeing is thinking about moving its operations out of South Seattle to somewhere else. Di Simone realizes that Boeing is the future of the Pacific Northwest, even post-war. And so he sells all the land that he owned, which is where SeaTac Airport is now, runway 3, I believe it was, for $1, just to keep Boeing in Seattle. Very effective, and it worked. And he was right. He dies in 1947. And here I just put this is horrible up here. Anyway, these are the neighborhoods where you find concentrations of Italian families, Little Italies as we call them. In Seattle, number 1. Number 2 would be in Walla Walla. I'm getting to that. College Place, suburb of Walla Walla, I guess you want to call it. And then you have the Hilliard neighborhood in Spokane, which is fairly close to Gonzaga University. Now, Walla Walla, I think if you were to poll 10 people randomly on the streets of Portland today and ask them, what do you know Walla Walla for? And they'd say wine. Today, yes. Before, it made its name in sweet onions. And they became world famous, and actually they become a victim of their own success. By 1920, Walla Walla, College Place, accounted over 120 Italian immigrant families in this small little part of Southeast Washington. How do we know this? Well, it's a tradition of the Italian families to carve their names into the back of the statue of Columbus. This is before cancel culture and people started tearing down statues of Columbus. They would carve their names into the back of these statues, and it's still there today. The Walla Walla sweet onion, which is a variation of the French onion, a French varietal, becomes famous throughout the United States. At the time, there were only 2 places in the United States where you could buy sweet onions, or where they came from. You could buy them, but they only were grown in 2 places. Cultivated, that's where I was looking for. Walla Walla was one. The other one was Vidalia, Georgia. And every year they used to have a competition between the Vidalia and the Walla Walla sweets. Walla Walla sweets are harvested after the Vidalias, usually in June. A victim of its own success, the sweet onion is now grown around the globe. You can grow them in Hawaii, Texas, everywhere. You don't have to grow them in Walla Walla or Vidalia. The last cannery, there was originally 17 canneries in and around College Place, which provided lots of employment, not just for Italian immigrants, but for Chinese, Japanese, and other groups, closed down. The last one was dismantled about 5 years ago and shipped off to Chile. To the left, this is Ben Cavalli. This would be my dad's first cousin. Ben died, unfortunately, a few years ago. And he was one, I believe there was only two when he dies. Now there's one Italian family out of 4 dozen Italian families that grew Walla Walla sweet onions. It doesn't exist anymore. However, it's not a sad story. Grapes have replaced onions, and Walla Walla has become a destination in the Pacific Northwest. Leonetti wine. Now, Idaho, oddly enough, has the earliest of the Italian immigrants, and they came in the form of missionaries. To the left is Father Antonio Ravalli, Jesuit, and to the right, Father Giuseppe Cataldo, who's also a Jesuit. And they worked among the Jesuit reductions. The reductions originally were established in South America, and the reductions, to reduce, the purpose was to take nomadic tribes and to concentrate them into one place and make good Europeans out of them, farmers, westernize them pretty much, assimilate them. Father Ravalli ends up coming to Fort Vancouver in 1843. He goes to Champoeg, which is south towards Salem in the Willamette Valley. The first European immigrants to Oregon were French Canadians. Most of them, if not all of them, left after the gold rush in 1848. From there, Ravalli ends up going to Idaho and establishes a few missions there, and eventually in Montana, where he dies. To the right is Father Cataldo, who established Gonzaga University in Spokane, which is still going on to this day. Now, this is a typical, I didn't do a neighborhood profile. This is kind of a profile in an Italian family that came to Idaho, Giacomo Manfredo and family. By 1910, there were about 2,600 Italian immigrants working and living in Idaho, mostly for the railroad or in mines. The biggest pull for immigrants was the railroad. The typical Italian immigrant of Idaho was like Oregon and Washington, single male, poorly educated, desiring to return to Italy after a few years. One unique aspect of the immigrants of Idaho was there was a good chance he did not come directly from Italy, but worked on the railroad in other parts of the country and eventually made his way out with the railroad employed to Idaho, which allowed him to bring his families out. So by 1930, there were about 400 Italian families in Pocatello. With a decline in rail travel after World War II, and a large number of Italian immigrants went further west or gravitated back east, mostly California. I included this because I thought it was interesting, and we think of today a lot of turbulent political times. There's nothing going on today that matches what was going on in the 1920s and 30s, especially in Europe. And that makes its way out to the Pacific Northwest with fascism. Like I said, it's not just bodies, it's not just people coming out for work, ideas as well come out. And fascism does come out to the Pacific Northwest briefly. As you know, in the 1920s, the state of Oregon was controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. Walter Pierce, the governor of Oregon, was a Klansman, and they had some 40,000 members in their rolls in Oregon, had rallies. They had a baseball team that traveled and played. They also had a band and a newspaper, a journal. So Oregon was a unique place. In comes the fascists. Now, from 1920, 1935, the fascist vanguard comes, I don't want to say infiltrate because they were very open about it, comes into the United States through the Order of Sons of Italy, led by Giuseppe di Silvestri, pictured right here in the lower right. He was originally, like all these fascists in their previous lives, were communists, socialists. He spent time in jail. He pretty much had the same resume as Mussolini. And he establishes several chapters throughout the US. it's very difficult to find any remnants of fascism, at least in the journals or the papers in Oregon. The information I have comes from firsthand account, and I'll tell you at the end here. Eventually, the fascists, like the Klan in Oregon, they implode themselves through embezzlement. So De Silvestri steals a bunch of monies that were donated. The Italians gave a lot of money, and they gave freely to the fascists. Remember, in the run-up to World War II, you had the Red Scare going on in the United States, and this was a fear of communism. You had anti-German activity going on. You had citizens spying on each other. And the fascists were tolerated, if not encouraged, because they were very vociferously opposed to communism. So if you don't like one, you got to like the other. The Italian Fascist Grand Council the Grand Council will eventually disown the Italian American fascists. In fact, they go as far as to label them as being closet communists, which is probably the worst thing you can do to a fascist. Like the German Bund, who were Nazis, American Nazis that operated in the Midwest, they're gone by 1940. If you look here to the upper left, you'll see these are Italian fascists marching at a Bund, a German American Nazi parade. And I believe this is in Wisconsin. To the right here, upper right, are two Italian, this is an auxiliary fascist group for Italian American women, girls. Now, Ernie Casciato, good friend of mine, who I taught with at LaSalle High School, he told me word for word that there was he saw a picture of a fascist auxiliary women's group from St. Philip Neri in the 1920s. I'm not spreading rumor. I can't verify this, so don't write it down. That's what I could find, at least about how rooted fascism was, or fascist activity was in Portland. But by 1940, it's gone. The World War II ends it once and for all. This is the Fascist League of North America, the Fasci Italiani all'estero, and this is their creed right here. I won't read it for you. I said, if you want to copy this, I'll give it to you. These were the nativist journals, a couple of them very anti-immigrant, anti-Italian. This is one of the traditional stereotypes of Italian immigrants, the organ grinder, and then, as you know, the Black Hand or the Mafia. Now, Andrea, how am I doing for time? Am I way over? Is there any questions? Are people still out there? Is it?
You're way over, but there are still 53 people here. Almost no one has dropped, so it means that it's pretty interesting. So please
Okay,
keep going.
I'm going to do this.
And just an announcement. So as soon as Joe is done, then people can chime in and ask questions directly.
Please do. Okay, becoming American, and there's a word here. If you look up here, Italianità, which is like Frenchness. What's it mean to be an Italian? What is Italian culture? Is it food? Is it religion? What is it? So as Italians pour into the United States, first generation, second generation, there seems to be this question of what is Italian culture? You know, everybody loves to go to these little Italies, but I think you need to realize that they're little Italies because Italians were primarily forced to live in these areas. And then when they became of means or wealthy enough and assimilated, I guess you would say, they move out into the general population, which isn't that a sign of success for immigrants? I don't know. But this question of Italianità is still being asked, I think. So this is during World War I. What's it mean to be? There's two types of assimilation into the United States for Italians during the 1920s and 30s and 40s. First one is coercive patriotism. And this is you will speak English, you will stand for the national anthem. The national anthem starts to be played at baseball games. It's kind of forced patriotism in a sense. Patriotic assimilation means, well, you're in this country, you've been in this country for a generation or two now. Join the team, become an American, melting pot, that kind of attitude. The Italian immigrants in World War I make up 12% of the American army. That's a disproportionate number. 12% of those that go back to Europe to fight are Italian immigrants. So I think for the Italians, they become Americans, obviously shedding blood, World War I, and then World War II, obviously the largest immigrant group that fights is the Italian Americans. So the question I have, and maybe somebody out there can answer at the end of this, what is Italian culture or Italo-American culture? And it's not the Olive Garden. Okay, a little bit of Italianità, the Lido and the Monte Carlo. I just included this only because my grandmother worked there for forever. And my aunt, great aunt, made ravioli for the Monte Carlo. And I saw this, and this is what stands out to me: pizza and steaks. I don't think you'd see that in a restaurant in Trieste, would you? Probably not. And this is the old Lido. They were right next to each other. Right next to the farmer's market. Then Schiavone's. Now, Schiavone's I put in here only because my grandparents lived about 2 blocks away, and we used to come down here on Saturday mornings or Saturday afternoons, sit at this bar right here and drink Green Rivers. My grandfather would buy us Green Rivers. Anyway, Nick Schiavone's a really interesting guy. He's an Italian immigrant. He came to Portland in 1908, and he was a paper boy. Back then, papers were sold on the street corners. They hawked them on the street corners. 1919, in order to save money, newspaper editors started to not buy the papers back that were left over. Before, they would buy back unsold papers. Well, when they, obviously, because the paper boys, that came out of their pockets. So there was a paperboy strike in 1919 in a lot of cities across the East Coast. And that was one of the professions for Italian immigrant boys, was newsboys, newspaper boys. Nick Schiavone does something about it. He founds a union for newspaper boys. If you go into Schiavone's restaurant, and on the wall, it used to be on the wall, I don't know if it's still there because you can't go into restaurants anymore, there's a original document of the founding of the newspaper labor union, or the union for newspaper boys. Pretty interesting. Anyway, Nick Schiavone was a great Portlander as well as an Italian immigrant. This was his, although they changed the spelling in his name, there's no K in Italian. Schiavone Field, which is in Westmoreland Park, is a pretty iconic baseball park in Portland. Alessio's Bakery, this is another one. Dean Quixote, I sent Dean a message telling him I was gonna give him a plug here. I think it's very interesting. Alessio Bakery originally started off as the French bakery on Southwest 6th Avenue in I think it was 1906. And it comes over to the east side, 1915, on the corner of Southeast Grand Avenue and Hawthorne. Alessio is the bakery today that Dean named after his uncle, and that opened in 2003. The Quixote family's from Piemonte, and right by Cuneo, I believe. And Dean is a ninth generation baker. That's as close to history as we have in Portland, 9 generations back to something. Pretty impressive. Anyway, Alessio Bakery still open, and patronize it. This is a monument to Italian immigrants in Idaho. And then you have the Italo-Americano churches in Portland. Yeah, this is an interesting photo. This is the grotto right off Sandy. And these are Italian prisoners of war that were kept in Vancouver, and they got a pass to go to Mass. This is the original St. Philip's down on 19th and 18th and Division. And this is the newer church built in the 50s. This was built by an Italian immigrant, Pietro Belluschi, who was from, I believe from he's from Ancona, and a famous architect. And the church is still there today, although the Paulist fathers don't own it. It's an archdiocesan church today. Now, we're coming into the end, so stick with me. From 65, this is the immigration policy the United States government had with quota system ends in 1965. And it's called the New Immigration Act, and replaces the old quota system. Up until 1965, you had on average about 5,666 Italian immigrants come into the United States. We don't know the number of Italians that settled in the Pacific Northwest. They quit keeping records of that. In the first 7 months of the new law in 65, after it's passed, 19,000 Italians come into the US. 66, the total at the end, 20,000. On average, 25,000 Italians immigrate into the United States from 66 to 70. Most of them are family members that are being allowed in to join their families. So by 1986, 5,000 Italians immigrated to the US, mostly joining family members already here. And this is because a couple of different things with the push-pull. There's no longer overpopulation in Italy. They have a 0 birth rate. The population is declining, in fact. There is the endemic labor shortage. People are not immigrating to the United States to work in factories in the 1980s. This is not happening. In fact, in the manufacturing base, starting in the 1970s, starts to decline. In fact, it is today. So there is no pull for that. However, Canada and Australia take in large numbers of Italians fleeing Italy in search of opportunity. These are principal years, 60 to 65, mostly in the East Coast. If you see down here at the bottom, you have the state of Washington, 22,000, 6,000 in 1960, and 1,000 in 1965. So it's a precipitous drop-off of Italians. This sums it up better. The flow of Italians, everything's coming to the East Coast that's coming. And then you have very few that come out. Butte, mining out here. And then you have Washington, Oregon. Regional distributions, mostly in the Northeast, the North Central, the West Coast, really only California. And we finish up with today by the numbers, 2,000 Italian citizens. This is estimates from Andrea Bartoloni. Most here work for international corporations. They're on some type of visa. I can't keep up with the visa programs. They work for Intel or Nike or research for, say, OHSU. Possibly estimated approximately 30,000 number of Oregonians of Italian descent. Washington has 6,000 Italian citizens residing and working in Washington. And the number of Washingtonians of Italian descent is unknown. If it's 2,000 to 30,000 in Oregon, it's probably 6,000 to 85,000 in Washington. The number of Italian citizens residing in Idaho is unknown. However, considering natural increase, it's probably about 3,000 estimated. Italian immigrants from 1880 to 1920, considering Idaho is one of the fastest growing states in the Union, it's safe to estimate the population who claim Italian ancestry is 15,000. And then I put this really interesting fact, because technically it is a part of the Pacific Northwest. British Columbia, Canada, has over 160,000 Canadians of Italian ancestry. This is first generation, second generation Italians living in Vancouver. Very, very large Italian population in Vancouver, right at 5 hours away. We don't think of that usually. Lastly, usually don't plug books, but if you really want to get the gist of the Italian-American experience, at least in the Pacific Northwest specifically, read Angelo Pellegrini's The Unprejudiced Palate, originally published in 1948. Angelo Pellegrini was a sharecropper's son in Tuscany, came out of abject poverty. I have 4 brothers and sisters, there's 5 of them total. Came over to McCleary, Washington by Grace Harbor, and eventually went from not speaking English at all to becoming a professor of English literature, Renaissance literature at the University of Washington, a distinguished writer. And he writes, he includes recipes, and he talks about traveling around the Pacific Northwest, encountering different Italian communities in Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. I believe Gino Peretti, Gino's out there. I believe Gino is a cousin of his. Gino's family's from Florence. So I'll end with that. Mario Batali, who's fallen from grace, is also from Seattle. And that's it. Questions, comments? Anybody still awake?
Gracias, Joe. Yeah, there's still 52 of us here. So please unmute yourself and feel free to ask questions. And actually, before you do that, let me mention that the Festa Italiana does have an auction going on and a raffle. And if you go to the Festa Italiana website, you can still get in until today at midnight.
Bravo, Joe. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia.
I would like to ask you a million questions, but I'll save them for another time.
Okay.
Well, if you have one, please go ahead.
Joe, that was a great talk. And I'm wondering if I'm wondering if the plan of Ladd's edition, based upon Washington, did not ultimately come from Paris.
Well, Charles Infant was a Frenchman, but he specifically contracted to drop the plans for Washington for the District of Columbia, and Ladd copies that. Originally, I thought it was because Ladd was a British heritage and he based it on the Union Jack, but it was a copy of Charles Infant's plans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I grew up going to the Pike Market every Saturday, and we would buy our groceries from the Italian farmers and fishermen there. You brought back some wonderful memories.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Joe, could you stop sharing the presentation so we can see everyone?
Sure.
Oh, thanks. There you go, gallery. So now we can all see each other. Wow, it's a lot of us still. Can't believe it.
Oh, I have a question. I wonder if Joe is planning to share the PowerPoints at some point.
Yeah, if you'd like it, I'll tell you what. Maybe Andrea, we can post this somewhere on the Festa site.
Yeah, we can post on the Festa Italiana website.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Andrea, also, our website mentions 2 articles, one from the Oregon Historical Society that touch on the same subjects. Do we know if we've posted those or made those available too?
We need to check in with Mike.
Okay, all right. We have 2 articles mentioned there that I think go along well with this. And by the way, Joe, that was amazing. Thank you so much. That was just great. I thought I knew a lot about the Civil War, and I never knew that Lincoln reached out to Garibaldi. That's fantastic.
And we know that now. A few years ago, an enterprising young graduate student in Italy came across the telegram from Lincoln to Garibaldi requesting.
Wow. Huh. I also wanted to mention, I came across the 2000 census for Oregon several years back when I was doing some research. And in that census, you can identify your ethnicity.
You could? Okay.
Yeah. And it lists under Italian 462,000 people identified themselves as being of Italian descent in Oregon, and that's the 2000 census.
Wow.
Oh, 2000.
Gee.
Yeah, I thought that number was a little conservative. Also, I have an interesting figure that I heard from the news from Italy today. So in Italy, there's this registry of Italians living abroad. And in 2006, it had 3.1 Italians, 3.1 million Italians living abroad. Today, it's 5.5 million.
Wow.
Wow.
So it increased in the last, 15 years, 70 something percent.
Wow. That's not good news for Italy, at least for their tax base.
Yeah.
Well, we're hoping that that's due to breeding and not immigration.
Well, I had a question about the crime rate that was kind of shocking me, how many
Sure.
Italians were the immigrants. Do you know if that was maybe related to mafia and Camorra and other organized crime that people brought over?
Well, you know, there's a couple instances that stick out, and I was mainly trying to focus on the West Coast, but there were 3 incidents. One in Colorado, the Homestead in Pennsylvania, and another one, I believe it was in Eastern Washington, where you had the policemen shot and killed Italian immigrants for no, and there was rioting. The Italian communities rioted against it, and it was pretty common that the police would, especially during Prohibition, would shake down Italian families for money or for alcohol. I mean, the Seattle police ran the entire illegal liquor operation distribution in Seattle during Prohibition.
Really?
A guy named Lieutenant Olson. Yeah, Ole Olson.
Huh. Damn Swedes.
And also in the 20s, I believe there was a Italian school here in Southeast. And was the kind of the fact that it disappeared related to the rise of fascism in Italy? So it affected the Italians here? Is that
fascism? Yeah, Portland, Oregon was really a nativist state, and the nativists they passed the compulsory school bill that outlawed Catholic education, went all the way to the Supreme Court. So they're very suspicious of Italians. However, the fascists, because of there wasn't a concentration of Italians in Portland or really anywhere in the Northwest, you didn't have these groups that were able to coalesce, around the Sons of Italy, or, where the fascists were presenting their propaganda and this and that. So it never really takes off, but they were, the Germans were really, their culture was really stamped out, especially on the West Coast. A lot of people changed their names because they couldn't find jobs if you had a German sounding last name, and outlawed the teaching of foreign languages. This is the coercive patriotism that everybody must speak English. Forget other languages.
When do you think that changed? Because I know I got here as an exchange student, even in the 70s, and it seemed like, actually as a kid, just for a month, and it seemed like already had changed, had the feeling Italian Americans were not seen negatively anymore. And
I think that changes, I'd say, in the 1950s, the 1960s, when you have guys like Rossellini being elected governor of Washington. It's the mainstream. The second, third generation.
Joe, I have a question for you.
Yes, Professor.
Professor Cavalli. So you have a lot of information, a lot of details, and I try to keep them all straight. I need to review
Good
also
luck.
the PowerPoint. But just can you tell me just briefly about the railroad move towards the west, because that's the story I've heard
Well,
about the Italians. So that's how I tell the stories, that they initially did not settle in the west, they settled in the east, and then they moved to the west because of building the railroad. That's
the railroads definitely. There was the transcontinental, which goes through Utah, goes to the southern route, and then there's the northern route, and that was built by a guy named Henry Villard, who's German immigrant, and they needed labor, and a lot of Italians that were working on the East Coast start to move west with the railroad, and Union Pacific as well. And Spokane becomes a hub for the Union Pacific, the Burlington Northern, as well as California. But there's nothing in Eastern Oregon. If you ever wonder why there's a large population in Eastern Washington, it's because of Spokane, because of obviously Gonzaga University, and because of the railroad. And the railroad brings out all these immigrants, a lot of them Italian immigrants, especially to Spokane, and Idaho Falls and Twin Falls.
Right.
And they stay because they're able to, because they have secure employment, they're able to bring their families out with them. So they stay. They're not a bird of passage on the West Coast. That's mostly East Coast.
Yeah, once I was in Shaniko, this ghost town, and
I just drove through there last week.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where they said that the railroad stopped, and then it was like a point where everybody was.
What's the name of the town?
Shaniko.
Shaniko.
It's a ghost town in
It's
Oregon.
in Morrow County. Yeah.
Yeah.
Angela, could you type the name, because I
Oh, yeah.
know I can't.
Shaniko. Shaniko.
Oh, Shaniko.
Yeah.
It's next to where that commune was, the Rajneesh Purim
Oh,
commune.
I heard about that.
Thank you. It was
My
very
pleasure. Sorry it was so fast and
No, well, there was a lot of stuff to cover, so thank you very much. And hope to see everybody at the next events. Unless you have any more questions, we'll call it a night. Now we can all go out and trick-or-treating, right?
here.
At least we had one person. Carmine was in costume. Oh, you changed. I see Carmine is not in Roman costume anymore. Well, you put the winemaker costume on, right?
A couple of things. I wanted to thank our hosts tonight, Dina Colas and Possessed Wine. Thank you so much. Dina Colas, by the way, they're open till 10 if you want to place an order. Don't forget, we've got our raffle is open and our auction items open till midnight. So please take a look at those. Our next event is going to be December 12th. But if you like some of the things that we're doing here, we'd love to do more programming. Maybe we can, talk Joe into telling us more great stuff, because I thought this was fantastic.
There's a whole lot more to do.
Well, I'm gonna bring my iPad over to my folks' house and sit them down, because they grew up in Southeast Portland and they need to hear about this. Anyway, so thank you so much. It was terrific. Also, if you're interested in working with us for these virtual events or being on our committee, please contact us. You can contact us through our website. Also, you can contact us through our email address, and which is on our website. And so please do that. And we'd love to have you join us. We'd love to have you meet up with us. Our email address, by the way, is Festa Italiana Portland, Festa Italiana Portland at Comcast.net, Festa Italiana Portland at Comcast.net. Thank you all for joining in. Don't forget, December 12th, big gala, Portland Opera. It's going to be really cool. We also, we're a 501c3. So if you got a spare $1 or $2, don't forget our olive oil. It's the best olive oil ever. Or At least that's what I've been told by Andrea, and he knows. And so anyway, thank you all for joining in, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you again, Joe.
Yeah, and actually, before I close it, if I can make a little bit of a self-promotion. Actually, first I want to promote one of Angela's events next Saturday. That it's, since we talked about Italian migration, there's another type of migration going on between, say, the Africa and Italy going on. And Angela will have a very interesting guest. So if you go in the chat, she put a link to that event. Also, if you like Italian music, okay, that's the shameless self-promotion. I have the Italian Hour, and I just got an email that normally my program is every other Sunday at 9 a.m. And tomorrow it was supposed to be the Russian guys, but they did not submit their program. So they're going to put more of my music in. So if you turn on the radio, 90.7 FM in Portland, on cable, KBOO, also streaming, you can hear some more Italian music. And then also, I'd like to mention the Italian Film Festival USA, since normally it was something that the Associazione Culturale Italiana in Portland was putting together for April. They're doing it online. And right now, if you search, just go on search engine, put Italian Films USA, they're doing some free movies right now, but you do have to subscribe to their email list or Facebook page. And they have some password protected movies, like new movies that you can see. So I think that's a pretty interesting event going on.
Thank you, Andrea. Actually, the link is only given through the newsletter, through the mail, and they post it on Facebook like the very last minute, so people can sign up. I just put the link on the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you.
It's a great opportunity. There's one movie tonight, actually, right now. So.
Yeah, usually, so if you get the email, you get to see it whenever you want during the day. Usually it's between noon and midnight. So you have 12-hour period to see it, but it's free. So. And of course, I hope to see everybody at the December event.
Thank you, everybody.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao, grazie a tutti. Buona serata.
Buona serata a tutti.
Ciao, buonanotte, buon divertimento. Ciao. Ciao.
Andrea, thank you.
Grazie a te, grazie Joe. Veramente interessante.
Veramente